Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the creator economy for B2B. Hi, and welcome today to Not Just Ads, the creator economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Davis Porter. Davis has a very broad background. He's worked in a number of different well-known companies, Pegasus Systems, Google, and he's in the last few years launched his own company, ForgeX. David's area of expertise but he also has a very broad knowledge, broad area of expertise as well across B2B. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation with him today. Davis, thanks a million for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Marcus. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, great. And I'm looking forward to it as well. Maybe you could walk us back and kind of tell us, at the moment you are CEO of ForgeX. You've started the company a few years ago, but you've worked across a number of different well-known corporate companies. How did it all come about in terms of how you got into ABM? How long ago it was? Was it something that you always had an interest in, or was it something that you discovered? How did it all come about?
My story is really weird. So I'll tell you kind of where it started. The person I look up to the most is my dad. And he was one of those original people who would join the tech wave, I don't know, maybe 35 years ago at this point. He was at Oracle when they were really just kicking things off. And so I've always grown up around understanding, okay, what are these trade shows? He would be going off to Gartner all the time. And through high school would hear the stories when he was CMO, heard that through college as well. And what was kind of unique was even in college, from that and knowing about it, I'm like, all right, tech is probably where I want to go as well. And marketing fits the skill set. And it's something that I'm interested in as well. So I was like, I'm just going to set this singular path, go all in. And then if I don't like it, I'll pivot.
Yep.
And so, when it comes to the first internship I ever took, I was a junior in college, and there was this small tech company in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I joined on as a marketing intern. The person I was rolling up to was the demand gen manager of this company. And the very first project that I ever had was creating account briefs for an ABM style of program, the first time that this company had ever done it. And I forget what the year was. Maybe this was 2016, something around then. And so I stumbled into it. And then through learning more about ABM, my next internship was at a billion plus company. So I went from this really small organization in New Hampshire over to Kronos, which is based out of Lowell, Mass. And that has now, they've had mergers and whatnot. They're called UKG Group, but very large company. And that just happened to be a industry marketing internship, which was entirely focused on ABM. So it was like, okay, boom, these internships, all ABM. Then my first role at a school at Pegasus Systems, they had just essentially converted their entire lead gen program into being account-based focused. So was their transition when we were just converting and trying to figure out, okay, what is this one-to-one ABM thing? What is one-to-few? How does it look? How do you measure it? How do you build it? And so was there on the largest vertical at Pega, which was financial services at the time, not sure what it is now. But what was interesting is just happened to line up on ABM. It was really catching steam as a very popular marketing strategy and go-to-market strategy, really. And so just happened to wind up into that. And then where ForgeX came into play is here's where it all comes back and gets connected. I remember hearing about the term SiriusDecisions and looking at some of their decks in college because my dad at the time, he was using some of their benchmark data and he would bring them on for advisory. And so when I would look at some of the decks or the printouts from the board meetings, SiriusDecisions would be mentioned in there or learning about that company. So my background, then I went from Pega went to go help Google Cloud launch their initial ABM programs. Then I went to Scale AI so I could round out my experience in the really large organizations deploying ABM there, then understanding what it's like as the single lead ABM practitioner building it in a hypergrowth AI company. And through those travels, it really helped me to get a unique and differentiated perspective on how organizations are successfully deploying ABM. And this was around little over 2 years ago when we officially launched ForgeX. And what was happening, not only then, but what we're working to fill at ForgeX now, is you have SiriusDecisions, who was acquired in 2019. You have TOPO, who was acquired in 2019. And so there was this gap in the market for a modern version of a B2B market research and advisory firm. And with our unique position on ABM, it was really resonating in the market. We started pretty heavy on the community side and then conducting a lot of primary research from ForgeX. But that's a little bit on my journey. Just happened to be in this ABM space, really doubled down in it, always wanted to be in tech, and then had this differentiated view, the market, and there was a gap there with a few acquisitions, and ForgeX, we are full steam ahead on filling it.
Great. Yeah, no, it's a very exciting journey. From when you're looking then at the gap that you were going to fill in the market, what was the area that you kind of thought that you would go after in terms of, rather than, let's say, looking at like kind of the operations or the tactics part? From what I understand at ForgeX, your area of strength or your core offering, so to say, is around research. Would that be right then, in terms of like helping people better understand how they actually can activate or go about evaluating what are the key opportunities in ABM, whether that's net new business, managing churn, or upselling existing accounts? You kind of help them create the strategy. Is that right?
Everything we do is research.
Okay. So you do the full thing.
So what's interesting about us is we're not an agency. We're not a consultancy. We partner with the majority of the agencies and consultancies that have ABM capabilities. But our biggest differentiator is there was such a gap and a lack of modernization for the way in which ABM was being deployed, or what we call the ABM deployment models. And so from the ForgeX side, we've really been pushing to standardize a modern way of thinking and a modern way of deploying ABM, getting off of some of the models from the mid 2010s, which haven't seen any type of modernization since.
Yeah. What do you think are the big changes then, in terms of like from how you approach it then, ABM versus like, say, traditionally back in the trends that you see it done right and effectively, versus, this is the industry standard and, we do this because it's the safe way, but it may not be the effective way. In terms of when you come into the market, then what do you think are the kind of the big changes that you see that drive more effectiveness?
There was this, so after the fallout of some of the acquisitions, that gap was being filled by recycled content. It was being filled by some of the tech vendors who were, I wouldn't, maybe manipulating is the right word, or configuring some of the definitions, even the definition of ABM, so that it really fit the product or service or solution that they were offering. And not only that, you have conflating definitions of one-to-one ABM, for example. You have one-to-many ABM. What does that look like? What's a true actual operating model for it? We didn't have that before. It's almost as if that was one piece that wasn't quite finished in the puzzle. Yeah. And so from the ForgeX perspective, that's one area where we're really working to help organizations, especially this year and next year. Just about every B2B organization is, one, they're working to tighten up their demand gen or integrated campaigns teams and adopt more account-based principles, especially when it comes to targeting and segmentation. And then they're also looking at how do we adopt an enterprise ABM strategy, whether it's the true one-to-one or one-to-few, and that being if it makes sense for their company, if the math is mathing and they have a high enough deal value. Another component, which wasn't spoken about in the mid 2010s nearly enough, or reflected on some of the models in market, was deal-based ABM, pursuit marketing, deal acceleration, that as a actual standalone deployment model, giving it the proper research and framework or model in order to deploy it. And then also making sure that it has the respect and you understand where it fits into your overarching broader ABM program. So there's just a lot of modernization that needed to be done. We've been working through it over the past few years, but there is still so much more work. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out how they adopt these account-based principles across the entirety of their revenue teams.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because I guess you work with a lot of different companies. Do you find that it's like, I guess a lot of them have trends, like what you mentioned there about the deal acceleration of coming up with ways that are practical to prioritize accounts that have more of a chance and that have a bigger deal velocity potential. But do you see then when you're working with clients, are there a lot of similarities in terms of the challenges that they all have with ABM? Or is it like if you're looking at, say, an engineering company versus a SaaS company, it's night and day in terms of their level of sophistication of like tech architecture and where they are in terms of as a team, in terms of as a priority, or like I know this is a long question, but I suppose to round it off really is like, what's the biggest kind of challenge you see with these companies that are like maybe one that is maybe not as sophisticated versus another that's very sophisticated?
So I can give you the wide scale survey data answer, but then also if you go in and you have 10 conversations with 10 different companies and 10 ABM practitioners, you're going to hear the same problems in every single organization. When we look at the top 3 challenges that the practitioners told us in our research this year in our state of report, you have number 1, insignificant budget. Not a huge surprise there. Yeah. Then you have lack of internal alignment around and understanding around the actual definition of ABM. Yep. And then you also have lack of internal alignment and understanding around the various ABM deployment models. Yeah. Those were the top 3, which is even more so surprising to me as well, because we see measurement and reporting as such a consistent challenge, but people are still struggling with the basics, and over 50% of ABM programs in market today are only 1 to 3 years old. So the practice has been around for almost 23 years. Yeah. In a week from this recording, it'll be 23 years, but you only have not over the majority, but over 50% are still in their infancy when it comes to the actual ABM program being in market in their company. So it's such a unique discipline, and the definitions and the way in which you enable all of the different cross-functional teams, how you build the campaign, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say rethinking, but there's a lot of change management, a lot of cultural adoption that needs to take place. And usually in these companies, teams such as sales or customer success, the other cross-functional marketing teams, they can be really supportive and excited about it because they've either heard ABM for years and now it's coming to their org, or maybe they had an attempt that wasn't quite successful a few years ago and you're reattempting with a modernized approach. So there are a lot of challenges, but it's interesting seeing those as the top 3. And the biggest one that I would share from what we see is measurement and reporting. Everyone is struggling so much with this as they're transitioning off of a traditional lead-based approach, or even keeping that lead-based approach and thinking about, how do I even start to think about ABM or account-based principled metrics, and let alone buying groups. I don't know if you've seen that in the market or conversations around buying groups, but it's always been a part of ABM, yet it's one of those from a measurement and reporting standpoint, especially when thinking about your architecture, to do it from a tech perspective and a culture perspective, it's really tough.
Yeah. It is, and I think especially when you're looking at something that's very long, if you have a company that's like putting out an RFP, but maybe they're not going to be in market for another 6 or 8 months. So like you need to even be there probably 6 months beforehand the RFP is coming out to even get on the list, and then it's much longer as well. But obviously then if we're talking about multi-million euro deals, so they're worth the while of investing and getting it right. I think some of the companies that have, how important do you think agility is in terms of having an ABM program? Because I guess when you're looking at something that's a very long sales cycle, if you have a framework in place and then something happened in the sales cycle, but it's like maybe there's, do you think that that's something that kind of is a key thing for ABM in terms of having something there that you can actually work with it in an agile manner, so that whether it's sales, whether it's marketing team obviously as well, but then if it's like in field, if it's sales in-house or whatever, like if it's one-to-one or one-to-many, how important do you see it as like having some kind of agility in terms of the system that's in place in order to be able to track it then accurately, but also to be able to adapt based on different companies you're going after and their sales cycle timeline?
One of the best managers I've ever had, her name was Akriti Gupta. She's at LinkedIn right now.
Okay.
And she had this saying, which when you are just deploying ABM for the first time, thinking about agility, she would say you need to fail fast and learn faster.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Because when you're first launching your initial ABM pilot, there will be a lot of things that you break, you're testing, you're trying,
Yeah.
you should be agile, you should be iterating. And so in the pilot phase, 100%, in more mature programs, agility looks different based off of the ABM deployment model.
Yeah.
For example, if you're deploying enterprise ABM one-to-one, you are covering, if that's your only job as a practitioner, realistically, given your resources, capacity, you're going to be covering 2 to 8 accounts maximum. That's your job. And you mentioned investment earlier, which I love, because when I think of ABM, I think of it as your account investment strategy versus just account-based marketing. It's really your account investment strategy.
Yeah.
And it's not just how do we invest in a list or a portfolio of accounts, but it's how do we invest dollars? How do we think about investing in our headcount, in our channels, in our campaigns? And so going back to agility in one-to-one, if you're covering 2 to 8 accounts, the partnership that you're going to have with the sales team, maybe even the customer success, if it's an expansion opportunity or an account in the expansion type, you'll be almost operating as a small revenue pod where you have the AE, the SDR, they have you representing marketing and being the quarterback behind all the cross-functional marketing teams and the channels and the actual campaign. You have CS who's coming in and sharing additional insights and things that occur within the buying group or buying groups within that account. Maybe there are a few different business units. If it's a really large account that you're pursuing, you're mapping those buying groups. You're trying to uncover their pain points. You're being agile with your messaging and the learnings and the conversations that sales is having with those various stakeholders in the buying group. You're taking those learnings, you're trying to distill it, you're trying to understand how do we better create a campaign that's going to get our buying group engaged and help them understand and realize the impact that our service or solution is going to have, and then ultimately convince them to buy for the first time or cross-sell or upsell. But agility in one-to-one, that's how that comes to play. One to many or growth ABM. That's how we define it. And growth ABM, thinking about this, we take a tiered approach where sometimes 3, sometimes 2, depends on your resources, budget, capacity again. But each tier is how you're allocating your investment. So for example, tier 1, you'd have a smaller number of accounts. So let's say you're covering 350 accounts total. You'd have 25. This is just an example too. It'll be different in every organization, but it would be, 25 in tier 1, maybe 50 in tier 2, and then the remainder in tier 3. And the eligibility of tactics or channels within the campaign differs based off of tier. The depth of personalization and investment in the accounts differs based on each tier. And so when looking at agility, it's okay, we have this broader list. How are we agile with the accounts that are in the program, making sure that we're investing in the right stocks to yield the highest potential return, accounts being the stocks in this scenario, and how
Sure.
are we being agile in our program as well, taking the wider scale learnings and helping to inform our actual program in that regard. Whereas one-to-one, and these are just being the complete opposite ends of the ABM deployment models, but one-to-one, your agile looks more different because you're really embedded in one or a
Hmm.
group of accounts with a few salespeople versus one-to-many. You have multiple AEs most likely as sales partners. You're probably partnering really closely with the SDR team, even more so than the AEs. And so how can you be agile in your actual campaign and thinking about the broader scale that you're deploying and making tweaks based off of some of the measurement and reporting that's coming in? Maybe there's some messaging that needs to change. Maybe there's a new tactic or a new channel that you should be deploying, thinking about that. And I'll leave you with this last thing on this, Marcus. The channels, what kills me when I see on LinkedIn or hear from some people sharing channels that work, it's the way in which they're saying channels that work. It's channels that work for me. And so
Yeah.
every organization, your industry, the people in your buying group, you need to know them incredibly well. You need to know where they go to learn. Where are they going to network with their peers? How do they think about the challenges and how do they speak on their challenges? How do they speak internally? And when you have just blanketed or playbooks that are out there and you try to adopt it for your company, but you're in a completely different industry, when it doesn't work, it's oh duh moment.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need
No,
to know your people well.
I agree 100%. Also, I think the really having a really deep understanding of the problem and like what you mentioned in the language that they express it, that's probably going to resonate more rather than this you're pitching about a functionality that you can solve that could be applicable to many different industries. I think sometimes that kind of get just
Yeah.
lost in the noise. Just one last question around ABM. What do you think? Because obviously there's always a lot of pressure internally from finance. You're looking at deploying it, but you want to show early signals of kind of that leading metrics, whatever way you want to put it, but something that is giving you that you're going in the right direction. When you're working with clients and they're saying, look, there's pressure to prove that this is going to be effective internally, what do you normally look at, or what should people look at as kind of early indicators that you're on the right track?
We think about it. So ABM or account-based go-to-market teams should perform like an orchestra. That is our favorite analogy behind this, where all of the different sections within the orchestra represent your internal revenue teams. So sales, marketing, customer success. But not only that, thinking about all of the different people that sit within those teams, with the conductor being your executive leadership team. Now, when thinking about an orchestra in that example, there are different metric tiers to think about in terms of the levels. So your conductor level or exec leadership, they're going to be thinking about different metrics than an overall business performance versus your musicians who are going to be thinking more tactically around the specific notes and the pitch and the key for their instruments versus the conductor who's thinking about the overall sound that's coming from the actual orchestra. So, one, thinking about those different levels of metrics, because if you're going to go and try and share with your exec leadership team about your webinar attendance
Yeah,
rate or
it's
your
not going to
webinar
land.
attendance for one large webinar, that's not
Yeah,
going to land. But if you
yeah,
go and talking about actual revenue, that will. But when thinking about, to your question, what are some of those early signals? One, you need to set the expectation up front around in the first 2 weeks of the program, you shouldn't, unless your sales cycle is
is really
7
short.
days. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're 7 days on multi-million-dollar deals and whatever you're doing. If there's a company out there, let me know because we need to partner on some research. But when thinking about, think about your sales cycle and then think about what you can actually accomplish in helping to progress those accounts early on in your program in that sales cycle. So some of the early indicators being, are we identifying and increasing the buying group contacts in our database? Are we engaging them? What does the initial contact engagement with the right contacts in that account, what does that look like as well? So engagement is a great early indicator. And then you get to those more midterm and more long-term metrics. With the long-term, of course, the most impactful metric and what everybody should be shooting for, because we're all operating inside of a business at the end of the day, is revenue. But engagement is a really great early indicator in helping to identify some of those key buying group contacts or engaging those buying group contacts.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think especially if you can show coverage, and I think with LinkedIn as well, you can kind of show, you get fairly detailed reports in terms of companies and within functions and job titles as well. Really interesting. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about like your transition from, you mentioned a number of like very well-known companies that people will be aware of, obviously Pegasus Systems, Google, Scale AI as well, of course. Like, maybe you could share just in terms of the transition from going from Scale AI, which is like grown in hyper growth, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go and start my own company. Was this something that you always had in your mind, or was it like it's now or never, or how did it all come about?
The operating velocity of Scale was something I had never seen before. It was the best thing to ever happen in my career, because coming from some of those larger organizations, you have a lot more resources. There are a lot of internal teams that are deeply specialized. And when you go to hypergrowth AI company, we didn't have those resources. And so having to get into more of a startup mindset for the first time was really, really valuable for me, and understanding and seeing what a really small team can accomplish, and an incredible team, let alone that. When you put all of these different A players who were on that Scale AI marketing team, I mean, you look at the CMO, for example, he's gone off and launched one of the hottest SEO agencies in GrowthX right now. He's a brilliant person, and that rings true across all of the people who are on the marketing team. So some of the learnings that I took from that and applied to ForgeX was really just seeing what can be done in a scrappy manner, what you can actually be capable of if you really put your mind to it, and then also seeing what you can do as, if you just go all in from a bandwidth perspective and you just go heads down, you can accomplish so much more than you think you can. Another really important learning here too is perception is reality, as in, you some of these small startups do not do a really good job in brand, but brand is so incredibly important, and even more so right up front. And so if you look at the way we launched ForgeX, brand was one of the really large investments that we've continuously made all throughout the history of the company. And it's given this more enterprise perception. And again, our ICP is companies who are 100 million and above. We typically work with 1 billion plus in terms of our advisory practice. And when thinking about, making sure that everything is enterprise grade, you have to have it polished. And initially starting a company, you don't have multi-million dollars in the bank unless you go and raise, which we didn't. We're a bootstrapped organization. And so what we did was made sure that everything we put out is enterprise. It's incredibly polished. Our brand is really polished, and we really, really work on that. And I think it has definitely helped us to get to where we are today. But again, we wouldn't be here without the learnings from Scale, and then also without the learnings from the larger organizations, which helped shape how you can be organized and really run a team across hundreds of people, which is a completely different skill set than operating in a startup environment. But I've always wanted to launch a company. This has been something I was dreaming about in high school and in college. I always thought it was going to be a tech company, funny enough, but just happened that building a market research and advisory firm is the first the first play.
Yeah, no, and it sounds it's going very well by the sounds of things. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a ride. It has been really fun, challenging, to say the least. There are a lot of it has not been all sunshine, but with every startup, that's just the way it is. But we've been
you have to
really
roll
lucky.
with it.
Yeah.
Did you have, when you were transitioning from Scale AI over to ForgeX, then did you have like kind of customers lined up, or was it like, okay, I'm going to start this and let's give it a go, and then you got traction after a couple of months, or how did you find it initially? Because I think it's the first months are kind of the toughest, I guess, no, until it's like proof of concept and so on, no?
So I went from Scale AI, and then I went to this company called Telesign, which was incredible company. Was there very short amount of time because then I transitioned out in order to launch ForgeX. They were our first client, more so on an advisory capacity, but we did not have massive, a huge pipeline of opportunities. We did not have a huge book of business or, a massive advisory portfolio or research sponsorship portfolio when I quit. It was more of a conviction that we would figure it out, and just really deep belief in the team, deep belief that we were onto something. There were a lot of early signals that helped to lead that. But I tell this there are a few founders that I'm really good friends with and have been friends even before them quitting their jobs and either raising or going in and really bootstrapping their own company. The biggest thing is mindset. The mindset of you can think that you have this beautifully crafted plan and that it's just going to go amazingly once you launch. That's not the case. You need to have the entrepreneurial mindset that you are going to take whatever comes your way and trust that you will be able to figure it out and weather every single storm. That is the most important piece because shit's going to happen. And you need to be prepared for it. And you have to have the conviction in yourself that you'll figure it out. Because maybe if you start a tech company or an AI startup and you have something proprietary and you're crushing it for the first 3 months, OpenAI or one of these larger companies comes and they replicate it. It's like, what are we going to do now? And if you don't have the right mindset, those are the entrepreneurs that quit and then can't weather the storm. But if you have that mindset of I will make it through whatever comes my way, those are the ones that are able to pivot and have all these stories around, oh, this was our initial business plan. This is where we ended up. Or we started this business, then I started another business, and it took me 4 businesses before I hit my $1 billion company. But it is mindset over everything. As corny and cheesy as that sounds, it really is.
No, it's true. From talking to different people on the show, it's definitely that plays a big part. And I think it's probably being able to deal with the ambiguity of things and moving forward constantly. But from when you started the company, then was it that piece in market research that you felt that was like, this is where the demand is, that's where you got the early signals, and then that kind of grew from there, was it?
Talking to people. Must have had 100+ conversations with ABM leaders, ABM managers, practitioners, demand gen, even some on the product side, VPs of marketing, some CMOs, and we would ask them about our initial thoughts on the business model, which has pivoted and changed ever since. But just hearing that there was such a need for what we were working to fill in that gap that Sirius and TOPO left post-acquisition, the consensus behind that is we just heard from everyone that they were missing that feeling that SiriusDecisions had, and the research and the modernization and really pushing forwards, it wasn't there. And we just thought to ourselves, hey, let's do this. Let's make it happen. We don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but we're going to go all in, learn a lot, talk to a lot of people, get the early signals that there's something. Tech companies were very willing to partner with us as well because we were just onto something there, and that's how we approached it.
Yeah, no, really interesting. From with the enterprise companies that you work with now, You mentioned as well, just before we started recording around, you have a weekly live show that maybe you could share a little bit about that in terms of, from a content standpoint, in terms of like how that fits into the overall business as well.
This has been to the ForgeX team who hears this, they were and we're probably going to pivot next year on the weekly. I love the show so much, selfishly, because we have some of the best and smartest guests on, and we get to spend, they graciously give us an hour of their time to share their insights, answer questions. I asked them a bunch of questions. Whatever we had in that initial script, we go off script. And so I just learned so much hearing from them, and I know our audience does too. And that, from a research perspective, is really great because we're hearing fresh insights, getting to really dive in. So we take those learnings, we use that from on our marketing side to help drive awareness for ForgeX to our community, to our research, to our advisory practice. So that is the business case for it. But the cadence and the show, selfishly, I just love. And I love doing it live too, because there's just a different energy when you're on there, and then you have all of these guests who are taking their time to come join, ask their questions, and it's a whole different feel than doing it pre-recorded. But there are pros and cons to both. Like doing this with you now, we're not live. This is pre-recorded,
Yeah.
and it's much more relaxed and versus doing one live. But pros and cons to both.
Yeah, I think so. I think the live, the challenge I find is getting the schedules to match up with time zones and stuff like that. I don't know what you guys do. You do the same time every week to keep it consistent and the same day, no?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we would
So
do Thursdays. Yeah.
which is great. I think the challenge that we have is just trying to get agendas to line up to get it like that. But I can see how that it's we normally release on the same day every week, but having I think the live show, in a lot of cases, it's a lot of companies don't lean into it enough. And I think when you have the consistency there, then do you see, and I'm sure you do, but like, do you see correlation then between business impact and kind of people that are tuning into the show? And you get a lot of, like, it might not show up in an attribution model, but it's people are telling you, hey, I saw this and I saw you said this to this person, or I saw this person on your show. You get a lot of that kind of qualitative feedback.
100%. You know what's a unique insight too?
Yeah.
The way in which we sell. Let's take advisory services, for
Yeah.
example. We do a lot of partnership pieces with some incredible companies and partners, but when you really look at the data, our clients really are driven through ForgeX led content, where it's either me or some of our content that our killer research team has created. And when they see the first party pieces, it helps them understand, okay, ForgeX has this unique perspective. They have this research-backed approach. They have all of this incredible advisory content. How do I get more of that and bring it into my organization? So out of everything we've done, the events, LinkedIn is actually number one for us, our community, and really having a founder-led brand is what has got us to where we are today. And a big emphasis, we've really been strategic in this, in terms of pushing a founder-led approach to ForgeX, which has definitely helped, because it builds a lot of trust when you have a face to the company and it's not just a LinkedIn company. And so that's been really intentional since day one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about from overall in B2B, like what you mentioned there as well around having a face to the brand? Have you found with LinkedIn itself, with like thought leader ads and promoting them, is that something that you do and you have had good success with? Or is it basically just the show itself and the organic reach of the show itself has been enough?
Well, here's the crazy thing. I think we've only run ads one time ever, which was for an event. We get organic is everything for us. And we have our community is really engaged. And it's funny because engagement doesn't always show up in terms of people posting inside of the community, but you see the engagement when we ask for survey data, when we ask or share different pieces out with them, they are deeply engaged. They are amazing and help to shape our research and our insights. And so organic has really been the driver for our company.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's evidence that you have a very good product market fit or service market fit, and there's obviously a lot of need for what you're providing as well. So having to run ads, I guess it's, you'll amplify it more and so on. But like, if you already have that and you have the demand there already, that's already the ideal situation to be in.
I'd love to run ads too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy because I think that ads would help to add some fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
We've just, from an investment standpoint, organic has been working so well
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
taken those dollars and reinvested in other pieces of the business, as funny as that is.
Yeah, no, but it's great though. It just goes to show, like, once you have the service and it's resonating and the product market fit, it makes life so much easier. I'd love to get your thoughts then in terms of, in B2B, there are probably like a lot of companies and so on that are like still in the age of digital transformation, still trying to figure out, how they basically engage with their audiences online, whether in your area specifically on ABM. I know there's ex-LinkedIn guys that used to work with in B2BI. They've launched a company, you might have heard of it, called Evidenza. It's basically like synthetic market research data on how particular types of people behave, but it's all synthetic data. But I'd love to hear from your side in terms of like trends and kind of where you see the future going and be, whether it's research or whether it's particular types of trends. What do you see the future being? ABM or B2B as a whole, from what you see, where do you see things in the next, say, 6 to 24 months and things growing? Maybe even longer. Maybe even longer. Let's say 36 months.
36 months when we go macro lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see every B2B organization that doesn't have a really low average selling price or average contract value transitioning into an account-based model in terms of their demand gen. Their integrated marketing teams are going to be deploying one-to-many ABM or growth ABM, how we call it at ForgeX. This is a trend that we're seeing all across the board. So that being one piece, revenue teams will really start to operate more in that orchestra capacity, and they will start to align and unify around the account investment strategy. This is something that it's taken us years. It has been a deep challenge, will continue to be a challenge, but organizations are starting to really wake up to it. And the whole traditional demand waterfall approach with the lead stage-based attribution, companies at scale are understanding that it's broken and something needs to happen, something needs to fix. Couple zooming in on a few areas, GEO is having a huge impact on search. We run a private CMO community. We've done 10 live in-person certification events with our partner Demandbase this year. It is coming up across ABM practitioners, across marketing leaders. It is something they are very aware of because it's so tangible. When you see a 20%, 40%, 50% reduction in search volume for your company, that you look at it, it's happening across the board. But you have to do something and you have to think about it. So that will continue to be top of mind. And when it comes to content as well, you can tell where there is just AI written garbage content. I personally can't stand reading when people just use AI to create content. What goes to my mind is why would I care to read your piece versus just go talk to ChatGPT or Gemini myself? And I can ask it more questions. So seeing actual original thought leadership that is research based and has proprietary data behind it, that is where I see a trend from the content perspective. That's what I think is going to be gold in the future because AI is going to commoditize, general and generic content.
Definitely. And I think now you can even see, most people you can already see on LinkedIn, you can pick out like, okay, this is being done by AI. Even the way the structure of the structure of the post, I was going and then it was like, and it's not what you think, it's this thing. And it's like, it's always the same. the narrative of the story always looks the same. I think people are getting aware of that as well. I think the authentic being adding some value, but also having something that's given a different point of view rather than just for me personally anyway, I can spot it a mile away what's AI generated. And maybe that'll get better as well. Maybe there'll be like a kind of a fusion of both things that it's going to help with certain things. But yeah, it's definitely, it seems like we're in the stage where I guess maybe in the early 90s, how what you mentioned about your dad that worked in tech for 25 years or more, that stage of where I suppose Google was coming and it was like keywords and so on were a thing. I think we're now seeing the shift of like what probably the yellow pages was to Google. Now it's Google is to LLMs, whether it's Anthropic or Cloud or ChatGPT or some of these. It's a really interesting time to be in the space.
100% is. And
Yeah.
it's almost the Wild West. When SEO
Yeah.
was just in its early phases, that's just
Yeah.
like GEO. Zero
Yeah.
click is huge. And another
Yeah.
interesting insight we are seeing, and this isn't from tangible wide scale survey data. This is more so from conversation, but a trend through conversations that we're having. So listeners, to this podcast, you might be seeing the same, but referral traffic from LLM based foundation models like a ChatGPT is converting really high, surprisingly. So you're seeing this drop in search, but when it comes from a ChatGPT, it's converting much better. And one of the reasons behind this is the trust. When you go in and you create a really detailed prompt and ask a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Claude to find me companies that will help solve this pain for me, you feel a level of trust with that tool in which that it's going to give you the best possible search results. And so when you go and you click on these companies, we're seeing higher referral traffic from that, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I guess for those companies and companies that want to be like them, it's really try to reverse engineer it. Know that you're discoverable, but that you're thinking about what are people going to prompt if they're thinking about this particular problem rather than features so that it can get picked up easier on the LLMs. We went way over time, so my apologies. If anyone wants to find out more about ForgeX or about any content that you share, where are you most active?
Connect with me on LinkedIn, Davis Potter, or head over to forgex.ai and join our community. It's private, only for practitioners or leaders. So we reduce agencies and solo entrepreneurs not to exclude them for any malicious reasons, but we want it to be so focused on the ones who are actually building the strategy. So come join. It's free to join, and would love to have you there.
Perfect. We will leave the details in the show notes. Davis, thank you very much again for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thanks so much for having me, Marcus. This was great.
Thanks.